Good evening and welcome everyone. I'm Abena Hutchful. I'm a staff attorney at the Young Center, and we are grateful you're able to join us tonight for this event about the unique experiences of African and Black immigrant children as they seek protection in the United States. One quick note before we get started with today's discussion: at the bottom of your screen, you should have a chat box where you can submit your questions throughout the presentation. We are reserving plenty of time towards the end of this webinar for questions. Bear in mind that we will end promptly at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. But if you have questions, please feel free to send them in and we will be sure to get to them. For those of you who may be new to our work, I want to tell you a little bit about the Young Center. The Young Center is the only nonprofit in the United States that provides child advocates to separated and unaccompanied immigrant children facing deportation. We serve children from all over the world, advocating for their best interests, their safety, and their rights. Our volunteer child advocates meet with children in government custody every week to accompany them, to listen to their stories, and make sure that they know they're not alone going through their immigration proceedings. We also have a policy team that works tirelessly to advocate for children and advocate for creating a just immigration system that sees children as children and centers their best interests in every part of the immigration system. Our conversation tonight, which has always been urgent, but is especially important and timely right now, as across the country and really across the world, people are mobilizing to demand racial justice and equity and to resist anti-Black racism. Many of us who work with immigrants have known for a long time that challenging anti-Blackness and discrimination is critical to our work. Despite being one of the fastest growing groups in the United States, the voices and stories of African immigrants, of Black immigrants, are often silenced and sidelined in the discussion about immigration. At the same time, Black and African immigrants face specific forms of discrimination and violence because of our racial identity and background. I'll give you an example. A recent study at the University of California showed that US immigration authorities lock detainees from African and Caribbean countries in solitary confinement 6 times more than the population at large. The study found that ICE is 22% more likely to record a disciplinary infraction as the reason for placing a person from an African nation in solitary confinement as compared to other detained people. There have been numerous reports that both in detention and in court, detained immigrants of African origin lack access to interpreters that are fluent in their native languages and are often spoken to in Spanish by ICE and border protection guards. Because of systemic anti-Black racism and disparities in policing, Black and African immigrants also face higher rates of deportation. Although 7% of non-citizens in the US are Black, they make up 10% of those facing deportation in general, and 20% of those facing deportation on the ground of criminal conviction. Because, and we all know it's well documented, that Black people are more likely to be stopped, arrested, and incarcerated, Black and African immigrants are disproportionately vulnerable to deportation. This prison to deportation pipeline rips families apart, traumatizes children, and fractures whole communities. At the Young Center, we serve children from various African countries, and we are acutely aware of the threats that Black children face after release from detention. Like all Black children in America, children from African countries are more likely than other groups to face criminalization and police harassment and brutality. Many of the African immigrant children we work with in government custody escaped state-sanctioned violence when they fled to the United States, and this re-traumatization by police leaves long-lasting scars. We organized this evening's event in hopes of contributing to the larger public discourse and knowledge on issues facing Black and African immigrant families and children. I'm really honored to present our panelists today, who are Fese Elonge, a scholar and Ph.D. candidate at Clark Atlanta University's Whitney M. Young Jr. School of Social Work. Fese conducts research on African immigrant healthcare disparities. Thank you for joining us. We are also joined by Sylvie Bello, the founder and executive director of the Cameroon-American Council. Founded in 2010, the CAC works to raise awareness about the issues facing immigrants from Cameroon, among other things. Thank you for joining us, Sylvie. And our final panelist, who I'm honored to present, is Makaya Revell, who's founder of the Marie Mambu Makaya Foundation, which is a foundation that serves children impacted and displaced by conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. As a young immigrant himself, Makaya has personally experienced the detention and immigration process here in the United States, and we are so grateful to him for sharing some of those experiences with us here tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We so value your perspective. And I want to get right into questions. I'll start with you, Fese. And this question is for all of you, but I will start with you, Fese. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and your work?
Well, thank you for that. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening to talk about this topic with regard to African immigrants, children and families. So myself, I currently work at Emory University Hospital. I am a board certified surgical oncology social worker, where I provide a lot of psychosocial services to a lot of patients dealing with cancers, all types, their families and caregivers. And I also, while working at Emory, I am a full-time student, now PhD candidate in social work. And my focus of my dissertation involves focusing on African immigrant healthcare disparities and really looking at the barriers that they actually experience, hearing from their perspective versus the provider's perspectives on exactly how they navigate through the actual healthcare system and how they are affected socially, politically, and economically. And from this presentation, my goal is just to provide an educational tool to the audience and everyone that is involved to have an understanding of the significance of the African immigrant population and their contributions to the United States. So that's pretty much it.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us and lending that expertise. Sylvie, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work with CAC? Sylvie? Looks like we may have lost her for a second. Maybe let's go to you, Makaya. Can you take a little time, tell us a little bit about yourself and your work with your foundation?
Sure. Thank you so much. My name is Makaya, and I'm grateful to be here with you guys. Thank you for Young Son and the Cameroon-American Council. Thank you for the organization. I am from the Democratic Republic of Congo, born and raised. I came to the United States when I was 16 years old. Right now, we are working with the Mary Mambu Foundation. Our goal and mission is to provide education, housing, and care for the orphans of war. My country has been torn by internal conflict. So our job is that to go where the problem is, trying to provide a care for the most vulnerable people among us. Since 2012, we have assisted 7,000 orphans, children in Congo. Through COVID-19, for several months, we have assisted over 300 children. So that's our work, that we are trying to provide a better future for the children who deserve it the most. I just came back from doing a personal study on the social justice in the United States. So I'll be writing an article about what I'm seeing at this time. So I look forward to share more information and about myself and the other work that we do through this event. So thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to hearing more about your work. And for those interested, the website is makayafoundation.org. Is Sylvie back? Maybe we can hear a little bit about her and you and your work. Yes.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Clearly.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Did you say you said clearly or barely?
Clearly, we can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you. So thank you so much to the Young Center, our friends ALDEA, our friends Angry Tia, and Abuelas who co-hosted this with the Cameroon-American Council. I am so honored to be with just wonderful African immigrant leaders, Makaya and Fese. I'm Sylvie Bello with the Cameroon-American Council. And this is our 10th anniversary in 2020. We are super excited that this is happening during September, which is our Heritage Month as African immigrants. And a little bit of what we do is very much tied to this month. In 2008, Africans in Montgomery County, Maryland, rightfully decided that we needed a month for African immigrants who are contributing, who are facing challenges. 2 years later, in 2010, when we started the Cameroon-American Council, we took that up as a challenge. And for the last 10 years, that's what we've been doing. We've been great evangelists on talking and advocating and pushing for African immigrant priorities in policies, in outreach, in national and local and state agendas. And so yeah, right now we are working on this very issue of African immigrant children. We're working on family separation and how that affects African immigrant children. And I look forward to discussing more and also learning from my co-panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your work pioneering this advocacy, and happy anniversary to CAC. My next question is for Fese, actually. Fese, if you could tell us, what are some of the policy and health discrepancies that you've seen in your research and your work that impact African immigrant children and families?
Well, thank you for asking me that question. I actually want to go ahead and provide this perspective by providing you with a bit of a timeline that I've put together here to really highlight the significance with regard to policies as well as health care disparities. So to really break down that question, I have had to go back and look at the historical overview of the US immigration policy and its effect, or more so impact, on the African immigrant population. To that regard, what we see here is there has been a development of an anti-African sentiment, an African ban rhetoric context within US immigration policy. So we have to look globally at global history to really understand this phenomenon. So the colonization of Africa, as many of us know, really started that anti-African sentiment. And then that was a pull over to the Americas in the 1400s when the actual slave trades began. We fast forward to 1607, where we have the British colonies coming over here and to settle in America. And with that being said, they started to pull tremendously in 1619, mass importation of African slaves, where approximately 400,000 slaves were sent more so to North America, but overall 10.7 million were actually sent to all of the Americas. And at that time, there was an open immigration type policy going on. It was more anybody was able to come in. There was not too much of a regulatory attitude that was going on. But that sort of changed in 1790 with the Naturalization Act. And what this actually did was establish the criteria for what it took to become an actual citizen. So it started a racialized tone by primarily stating that in order to be considered a citizen in the United States at that time, you had to be a free white person. So that pretty much removed anybody that was at that time African or Black at that time from even being eligible, even seen as a human being. That rhetoric continued throughout history with the transatlantic slave trade going on primarily up until 1865. We had our first attempt by Abraham Lincoln to try and abolish slavery. That did not work until the 13th Amendment was actually implemented and ratified. And by that time, there were approximately 4 million Africans in the America at that time. So we fast forward a bit and we reach the next phase, which would be 1921. A lot of people don't know that because of the amount of Africans that were in America, as well as the other ethnicities that were coming over, they implemented an Emergency Quota Act. And within this Emergency Quota Act, there was a response to try and get a hold on a lot of foreign-born persons coming in. So they issued a 3% quota for any foreign-born individuals coming in, and African countries had the lowest quota that there primarily was. And this ran over into 1924, which still had that same quota, where you have African countries only allowed to have about 1,100 people come in, compared to countries like Germany, who were able to have about 51,227 people come into the United States. And that in itself is discriminatory, and that it has a very racialized anti-African sentiment behind it. So we go into 1952, where that policy actually upheld the national origins quota. And the significant piece about this is that 85% of the immigrants that were actually allowed to come in during 1952 were from Western and Northern Europe. So again, no real reach out to any type of African countries at that time to welcome that in. That sort of changed in 1965, where we had the attempt to actually remove that quota and focus more on preference-based type of skill sets to come in, high skilled individuals to come in and just, be a part of the United States. Again, that did allow a lot of Africans to come in, but you have to understand that a lot of the high skilled or highly educated type of positions, Africans at that time did not have those, or more so into service provisions, labor intensive industries. So again, you see that same type of racialized anti-African sentiment going on. And then we move into 1986 with the Immigration Reform and Control Act. And with this was actually a very interesting act, because it actually provided amnesty or legalized a lot of undocumented immigrants, about 3 million to be exact. Interesting is if you go into the INS yearbook on statistics for immigration, the top 20 countries that actually were able to receive the amnesty, none of them were actually any type of African country at that time. It was more so South America, Asia, and Mexico, which again, still creating that anti-African sentiment. The most significant policy, I would say, was in 1996, where we have the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. This actually criminalized a lot of immigrants within the United States, whether they were legal or undocumented. And it actually hit the refugee and asylee population, because a provision was released within that act that stated that a refugee or asylee had to file within 1 year of them coming into the United States. And because of that, that placed a lot of discomfort among a lot of refugees and with regards to understanding the American society within a year time frame and actually accessing necessary resources to file the necessary paperwork. And with regard to social and healthcare, we have again in 96, the Personal Responsibility and Reconciliation Act. And this actually actively implemented a 5-year ban to access of any type of federally funded healthcare programs for legal immigrants. And this extended out also restricted to undocumented immigrants. So by default, this had an adverse effect on a lot of African immigrants in the context of this created a lot of mixed status families. We have families that are actually refugees or maybe legal, but together they cannot navigate the United States system in collaboration because of their various immigration statuses. And also this led to a lot of fear amongst African immigrants reporting their healthcare statuses. Research has been done with regard to cancer or other chronic conditions. And it's been found that a lot of African immigrants have lower rates of screening for breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colorectal cancer. And because of this, a concern that has been found in the research is the affordability of the actual healthcare services due to this act, which was done in 1996. So within this whole context of US immigration policy, there has been an incremental growth, or one can say the incremental theory of build upon each theory or each policy to try and, suppress the African countries or African immigrants from coming in. So in conclusion, that's how healthcare disparities arise within the policies in the United States.
Thank you so much for that. And I wish you had been my history teacher, because that's really a very comprehensive and yet succinct overview, and really lays the foundation to show how discrimination is baked into our immigration system, right? And Makaya, you've experienced the impact of some of the policies that Fese is talking about, the policies and detention firsthand. We are so grateful to you for being here and sharing your experience. Could you tell us a little bit about your experiences with the immigration system?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much for the question. Just kind of, briefly to, talk about a little bit about what Ms. Fese just beautifully articulate. The African experience, of course, we have a slavery and colonization really damage our relationship with the Western society based on our experience in the world the African people went through during those periods. But the most devastating thing that happened to Africans were when the missionary came, the Americans and the European historians, they told the African stories in a way that makes them feel good. So in other words, they did not talk about Africa in African land. So that created kind of misconceptions of Africans in a Western society, and that created very, a racism or doctrine for the Africans who were living in a Western world. With the personal experience, is it true that Africans come to Western society in America, for example, for many reasons? Those reasons include, economic, asking for asylum, climate, domestic violence, for all sorts of reasons. But for the personal story also is that we are disproportionately kind of undermined with our story. In other words, sometimes in a judicial system, in a court system, our story is not often believable. Even though when we're fleeing violence, the violence is often perpetrated by the multinational corporations. The example of that, like we saw in 1993, Somalia, 1994, Rwanda, 97, we have the Congo, and in 2011, we have Sudan. The language that they use to define our conflict also stand a way for us to do well. For example, but they're calling it Congo conflict a civil war. Congolese are not killing each other in the Congo. That's a misrepresentation of a civil war. But what's happening in the Congo, but we have a multinational corporations coming in because their wealth, the mineral, natural, or wealth of Congo, they're taking it by doing so, but they're supporting a militia group, the rebels, to overthrow the villages so they can take by force our wealth. So that war led me to come to the United States. I often tell young people that you often have to define your narrative. Long story short, I came to the United States by boat. The ship docked in New Orleans. The first day I was in New Orleans, where they send out the immigration agent with the, fully uniformed with the weapon to pick me up, to take me to the small boat so we can get into mainland. I refused to get off that boat. I didn't speak any English. I didn't understand what they were telling me, but somehow I decided that I'm not going to get off that boat. So they call interpreter, but to come to convince me to get off that boat. This man was from Canada. He actually begged me to get on the boat, so I did. And when they took me, finally, they took me to the Box County in Pennsylvania. In the first few hours, me arriving there, I was put into war, facing a war in the timeout for 20 minutes. Later on, I learned that I was put in the war because I refused, not because I went to take a cup of water without asking the staff's permission. So that was kind of a wake-up call for me. I kind of begin to understand what kind of environment I was in. So from now on, things just went really bad. This was in the early 2000, they were from 2001 to 2002. So the place, the Berks County was a very interesting place in the sense that they were following the international norms, the international laws. They were doing things based on emotion, I think, because in 2001, the September 11 just happened. So most of the residents were there were unaccompanied minors from all over the world who were treated very badly. The verbal abuse, sometimes physical abuse took place in this environment. And I saw the deportation of Africans immigrants. I knew 3 Africans were there, got deported, and just the abuse. And we actually got connected with Amnesty International. So they did an investigation of that place and what was happening around the country through this unaccompanied minor detentions. And when they came out with I'm holding here, it's 85 pages report on what was happening in that environment. So children don't belong in detention. Detention is really bad for the children because it did something profound to me as well. I always see myself as a, strong-minded, opinionated, if you will. But this place nearly destroyed my spirit. It really made me really angry, depression. I thought about committing a suicide almost every day. But it's a very difficult situation for the children. Generally speaking, what's happening today with the detentions around the country is not new. It's something that we've seen before, and that this has been a US immigration policy for so long. The stuff I'm talking about took place almost 18 years ago. So what's happening today, it's not new. But my experience has been of a resilience and courage, moral courage, political courage, and the people around me has played big role in my life. People, particularly my mother, Dr. Revell, and my father, my late father, Dr. Alvin Revell as well. My story I'm sharing with you is not unique. So many people go through this on a daily basis, are going through it as we speak. But the events that happen around me is unique. For 18 years now, I have lived in the United States, a little over 18 years. I have been in a deportation order. But through this time, I have accomplished things that I have not seen accomplished through anybody that I know who are in my situation. That's because of the people around me have been extremely supportive of me and my case. Under deportation, I was a valedictorian in my class in high school. I graduated from college. I have a master's degree, and I was able to create the Mary Mambu Makaya Foundation. I am a public speaker. I speak with the various of the topics, especially what's happening in my country, in Congo, politically speaking. So I am still in that immigration limbo. So even that did not stop me and cannot stop me to do what's right for me and the people that we serve. So I look forward for your questions, and I thank you for asking the question.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. Thank you for your courage and your fortitude and your perseverance in the work that you're doing, both for yourself, but for the many children that you are and families that you are helping through your work. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and I hope we can talk some more about your work in this discussion. Sylvie, if you could share with us, because what Makaya is saying is something that the children that I work with from West and Central Africa have also expressed too, is that feeling that your story is not your own, that you are silenced and not able to, are not being believed, or your experiences are not being centered in immigration advocacy. Can you tell us a bit about the ways in which Cameroonian families experience anti-Black racism and anti-African discrimination and family separation as they attempt to seek protection in the United States?
Yes. Hi, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Hello?
can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay. This is going to be a tough act to follow, because when you have an impacted community leader Makaya. It's really, those are the men and women who inspire us in the work we've been doing for the last 10 years, right? And yes, Cameroonians and Africans really have stories, and this is a great time to really share them during our Heritage Month. Right now, some of the largest detainee populations in detention centers across the country are from the African countries, specifically from Cameroon. In Otay Mesa Detention Center, for instance, we have more Cameroonians at Otay Mesa than Central Americans and South Americans combined. At Adelanto, our colleagues tell us, and from our own community data collection, somewhere between 20 to 30% of the detainee population in Adelanto are Cameroonians. In total, we have about 10,000 Cameroonians at various stages of deportation. Abena, that means 10,000 families, many of them with young family members who are also children. All of these 10,000 families experiencing family separation, a story that is not often told. We can share about a young mother and we had to go to the Young Center for help. She arrived at Mexico, crossed 8 countries from Cameroon to Ecuador, crossed 8 Latin American countries to Mexico, experienced anti-Blackness in Mexico because the Mexican government has visa transit, right? Yet, yes, that applies to everyone. But where the discrimination and the anti-Blackness comes in is where the Mexican government will have every caravan come through. We all know the caravan stories, anyone following immigration policy or immigration media, right? They will have every other person that is closer to whiteness. Well, with the southern border now, we have, people seeking, people seeking asylum from Eastern Europe, from the Middle East. It's not just Latin American countries, and definitely not just Mexican nationals. And everyone else we go through. And what happened is that Cameroonians led the Black migrants at Tapachula. So folks, if you want to Google Cameroonian protested in Tapachula, Mexico, please do. Why? Because the Mexican government will give these passes to everybody else except the Black people. And then we'll turn around once the media finally got there, we'll turn around and retaliate on the Cameroonians by letting others go through, other Black migrants go through, and not the Cameroonian. So with all of this, this young mom had a baby during COVID, and the baby unfortunately did not make it, right? And so we had to reach out to our friends and our partners because we really were not sure what to do. Because as a small African immigrant organization, the anti-Blackness does not end with the Mexican government, right? It goes all the way to funding and to donors, right? Because when the narrative is consistently erasing Black migrants and African migrants, that means donors and funders may not even know that we exist, right? And so we are so grateful that we were able to tap into a network of partners like the co-hosts tonight. And, they were able to connect us with UNICEF and other organizations that on our own we just will never be able to find out, right? So that anti-Blackness that met our young mother and hundreds of Cameroonians and other Africans at the southern border of Mexico did not end there. From Tapachula, you go up to Tijuana, which is the north of Mexico, bordering with San Diego on the California side. Cameroonians, again, experienced the metering system. And that metering system really comes from the US government, right? Where the US government has just across the board racist discrimination, but specifically anti-Blackness, because every other person can go through into the metering, and we had these Cameroonian members and Black members and Black community members from other African countries, including the Congo, where right? And Cameroonians again protested. They led the protest. I hope you're seeing a trend here of, Cameroonian being considered troublemakers. Maybe, maybe that's what we are. With all of this, right, and please, I encourage folks to Google Cameroonian protest Tijuana, Mexico. You're going to see, the resistance of the Cameroonian migrants. And what were they protesting? They were protesting the discriminatory practices of the US government and the Mexican government in getting into the US and seeking asylum, while everybody else will come and go through. By the time these Cameroonians are getting into the US system, they already have a reputation, right? Fese mentioned the anti-Africanness, the African ban, so it's not just anti-Blackness, there's a specific anti-Africanness that is not talked about, right? Because not only does white supremacy favors closeness to whiteness, we know this, as Fese had mentioned, when she brilliantly illustrated our ancestors coming to America forced. During slavery, when our ancestors were stolen from the shores of Bimbia, Cameroon, and brought to America, they had, there was differentiated and separated with closeness to whiteness, right? It's not just with physical color, but also closeness to whiteness in mannerisms. That's why we had, when enslaved Africans, those who work, in the slave oppressor's home, were treated severely but differently from those enslaved Africans who worked on the farm. It's the same thing with the immigration system, right? Black immigrants who come from quote unquote westernized countries, right, like the Caribbeans that are closer to the West, are treated differently than Black immigrants who come from Africa. Nothing has changed in 400 years, like Fese mentioned, right? So when they get to the detention centers, they're met with these, differentiation in white supremacist, racist immigration networks. And that is the reason why Cameroonians, again, protested at Pine Perry in February. And you know what, Abena, right now, everyone is talking about the Black nurse, right, Dawn Wharton, who was a whistleblower. But I would like everybody to know that Black women, they should believe Black women, because Cameroonian Black women, in fact, protested medical negligence, sterilization back in March 2020. So I look forward to questions and again, learning from the panelists and learning from more from the questions. We want everyone to know that Cameroonians, Africans, and their families, right, have been experiencing discrimination, but they have been resisting in the spirit of their ancestors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvie, for highlighting specifically anti-African racism, but also shedding light on how long this fight has been ongoing. Both you and Fese adding the historical context, right, to this fight, and all the discrimination that African immigrants face even before getting to the US. Yeah, thank you all so much for shedding light on your experiences and on the experiences of Black and African immigrants today. I want us to end this note, this discussion on an empowering note, especially with all of the fear and uncertainty that we are all feeling at this time. A note of empowerment, if you could all, each of you, share some actions that we could all take to improve these conditions, both in our local community and also systemically. Let's start with you, Fese. What are some actions that you would, some calls to action that you would make?
So for calls to action that we all can do, because we have to understand the actual political system, it can either be top down or from the bottom up. And from the bottom up, as us being not bottom per se at the totem pole, but we actually have an active voice. If we reach out to policymakers, legislators, engaging in a lot of engaging in things like this with regard to having an open dialogue, having an open discussion, getting a lot of individuals that have the same like minds with regard to the concerns that a lot of African immigrants face, and moving there to writing letters to policymakers, because we all have an active voice within implementing policy. And it pretty much starts with us, because at the end of the day, without our voices, without our public opinions, there is no policy. So that is my suggestion.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Sylvie, let's go to you next, and then let's wrap up with Makaya. What would be your calls to action to add to what Fese has called on us to do?
Absolutely, we agree with Fese, and we want to definitely say that look into policies that are coming out. Check to make sure that those policies are prioritizing African immigrants, right? Check to make sure that in this moment of racial reckoning, when everyone is looking at policies, for instance, with coronavirus, we all know that Black people have the highest rates of disparity. When you look at the LGBT movement, we all know that Black trans women have the worst challenges. Why is it that in immigration, folks are not looking at immigration from a Black, anti-Blackness, Black erasure perspective? So when you're thinking about policies, when you're thinking about candidates, when you're thinking about ballot issues, when you're thinking about the news that is coming through, right? Ask yourself, how are they looking at immigration from an anti-Blackness? Because the fact is, if anti-Blackness permeates, racism permeates throughout every sector in America, immigration is not spared. And as we're thinking about African immigrant children, we want to share the very, we want to share a success story as an activist. All of you, many of you, at least definitely our partners and the panelists on this call, all supported our toolkit on Free Pauline, a young woman who underwent, her body was ripped, her organs taken out, right, at Irwin Detention Center. We thank you that because of your calls, because of your emails, because of your prayers, and support from members of Congress, right? She was able to be released. So there is a lot of good that happens with advocacy and checking on policies and political leaders and what they're working on, right? But I want to call on you again. Help us free Josephine. Josephine is a mother of triplets. She is right now at Montgomery Detention Center. Josephine was on the same deportation flight as Pauline. Josephine was in the same Irwin Detention Center where the whistleblower Don Wharton talked about this sterilization happening, right? Help us free Josephine. She is detained, and we know that advocacy works because with your support, you helped us free Pauline. Thank you.
Thank you for highlighting that story, that experience, and calling us to action on that. Makaya, what would be your call to action for the public, for us?
Thank you. For my call for action, I can tell you a story about Brigitte Cambria. Brigitte used to work for what we call it the other side, for the immigration side at the detention center in Berks County. First time we met, she ordered me to do the dishes there. I didn't do it. So many years later, when my case was just in a limbo, I was looking for a lawyer to help me to reopen my case after several attempts to reopen it. So we went to Bridget's office, and she remembered me. Back then, she went back to school to become an immigration attorney, but to help the immigrants and the African immigrants like myself. So finding her, she worked really hard to reopen my case. So when she applied to Justice Department, they finally reopened the case because of her hard work and dedication. So what I would say for call for action, the American people, the American public are very compassionate people. Reach out to your friends, reach out to your family. I'm just speaking now based on my own personal experience. In the process to reopen my case, one of the judge and the lawyer asked if I was, productive member of the society, if I have any support, and they asked, he asked for letters that the people I know to write a letter on my behalf. We had almost 400 letters from the American people. So that really helped my case. So speak up and ask for help. As Africans, we have a tendency to suffer alone. We have a tendency to swallow our suffering, but we don't talk about it because of our belief and our kind of religious or tribes or where we came from. But in America, it's okay to speak up. People will listen to you, and people will help you when they can. So speak up. For the refugees, it's not a bad thing. Religiously speaking, Jesus, Muhammad, and Moses, they were refugees. Today, they are the most people in the religious. So speak up and ask for help for the organization that is working but to help the children, so but to help an immigrant. So don't be ashamed and don't be afraid. So speak up.
Thank you so much. That is a beautiful and very important call to action to speak your truth. And thank you for sharing your truth with us in this discussion. Thank you all of you. We're running a little low on time, but before we end, I wanted to get to some of our questions. Tonight's event is part of a Young Center partnership with a few of our sister organizations funded by the Four Freedoms Fund. We are working with the Cameroon-American Council, ALDEA, the People's Justice Center, and Angry Tias and Abuelas of the Rio Grande Valley. So for the Q&A section of the conversation, prior to this discussion, we asked some of our guests to submit questions for the panel and for some of these partner organizations. So I'd like to start with a question for the folks at ALDEA. But if you have some questions and you're watching, please do share your questions in the comment box, like we said, and we'll be sure to respond either in the comment box or via email to you. We will try to get to all your questions. But first, I want to ask our guests from ALDEA, Bridget Cambria and Sahar Jalili. Thank you for joining us. What have you seen in your efforts to help families at the border in terms of the specific discrimination faced by African immigrants?
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. Listening to the panelists so far, like I'm inspired, and I've actually learned an immense amount just listening to even 50 minutes of what they had to say to me. As far as being a Black immigrant in detention right now, I can tell you what I see. What I see with families who are in detention, they are ignored when they complain for medical ailments. They are not believed when they speak their truth about what happened to them in the past. They are treated disparately by facility staff. And I can tell you that they express to us as attorneys that they know it's because they're Black. That's what I've been able to see. For those who seek out protection through asylum, it's clear that when they speak to an immigration official, they're treated with more hostility, it's more adversarial. They're always at a disadvantage. And you know, their stories typically are so compelling and have some of the strongest bases for asylum that we hear. And so many times they're looked over and they're ignored. The other thing that I would say is that I find that Black immigrants, especially in adult detention, are detained far longer, extreme periods of time. I remember meeting a man who was detained at the York County Prison, and he had been there for 2.5 years in civil detention with no criminal history and had just sought asylum. That's all he did. He ended up winning his case, and he's free, and he is in New York right now. But he had to sit in a criminal jail for 2.5 years just to have his case heard. That's the experience that I see. And if I could, just one thing before before I pass it on, I want to thank Makaya for his very kind words. He's an extremely strong and impressive young man. He has always been, even when he was in detention. But I think a good anecdote for him is that his first language is Lingala, and obviously immigrants who come from Africa speak all different types of dialects. And because he is proficient in so many languages, he often assists immigrants with their cases. And probably the most famous case that he has helped with, and he helped us personally, was when family separation began in 2018, the primary person on that case, her name is Mizelle, and she was from the Congo. And when border agencies were trying to talk to her in detention, they couldn't find an interpreter to speak to her. And Makaya, all the way from Pennsylvania, provided interpretation services for Mizelle. And she ended up being the plaintiff in Mizelle, which is the family separation case that reunited thousands of families. So he's an extremely impressive man, and I'm very privileged to speak after him.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Bridget, that piece of history that I did not know. And thank you so much for your ongoing work, Makaya. I wanted to add that is another call to action for folks to contribute to accompaniment services and interpretation services. You don't need special training. If you're African and you speak an African language or dialect, you can help someone in government custody with interpretation services they desperately need. Our next question is for Madeline Sandifer at Angry Tias and Abuelas of the RGV. Could you tell us some of your experiences working with Black and African immigrant parents in detention? What are some of their urgent needs right now, and how can folks help? Do we still have folks at Angry Tias and Abuelas with us?
Yes, hi, I'm Madeline.
Okay.
How are you?
Hi, Madeline. I'm doing well. How are you? I'm not sure if you heard my question.
I did not. I had to run and get a new cable because my phone is running low on the battery. Would you?
We've all been there.
Would you,
Yes.
would you repeat it, please?
Yes, I was just wondering if you could please tell us some of your experiences working with African immigrants in detention, specifically African parents. What are some of their urgent needs right now, and how can folks help?
I can. Well, first of all, thank you for to the Young Center for inviting us to this webinar, and also to Sylvie for her comments. I can tell you that advocacy does work because we have recent experience with that. We advocated for a pastor from Uganda, Pastor Stephen Tendo, and we were able to stop his deportation, at least temporarily. I can also tell you that I would echo the comments that I think Bridget made about discrimination at the detention centers. I see that in my work very often. What I'm finding is that human contact is so very important for these detained asylum seekers. And I would encourage you to help the ones that would like to be in touch with someone at the detention center, the ones that have been there, and I've seen them also that they've been there for 2 and 3 years. We have a program, I started a program called Adopt an Asylum Seeker. And if they would send us a message either via our Facebook, which is Angry Tias and Abuelas of the RGV, or our website, angrytiasandabuelas.com. We can put them in contact with one of the asylum seekers that are detained at the Port Isabel Detention Center right here in South Texas.
Thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to learning more about that program. I want to say a big thanks to our engaged audience. A big, huge thanks to our panelists. Thank you for taking the time to participate in this event and honor National African Immigrant Heritage Month with us. Thank you for your thoughtful contributions and for sharing your stories and for your fight. I want to encourage everyone to stay connected with us. This event is part of a larger series on events on how detention impacts children and families. You can stay connected with us via the Young Center's newsletter and our website and our social media. You can learn about upcoming events. Sign up for the newsletter at theyoungcenter.org/sign-up. And our handle on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is @theyoungcenter. Thank you all. Stay safe, be kind to yourself and others, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.